Okay, so we are starting the 7th unit on the progressive era, and we're going to answer this question on Zoom together. But I want to keep this question in our brains because all throughout this unit, I want you to think as we go over different reforms and different movements. How does reform cause progress? And keep in mind that the word progress can mean however you want to define it, but for us here it'll be to move forward, to fix, to make better. And that's what the progressive era is all about. Making progress after the Gilded Age and trying to be better, become better, following all the issues that were created from the Second Industrial Revolution, that dark inside of the Gilded Age. So let's start with a little bit of background, the origins of progressivism. First, when we look at the Gilded Age, which we just did, we spent an entire unit on it, we saw that there was rapid industrialization. So very quickly, we saw that there were factories being built up, new products being made, and with that came an increase in immigration and urbanization, that movement of people to the cities. Now, the combination of all of these three pieces led to national growth and prosperity. But with that rapid growth also came poverty, unemployment, terrible working conditions, and political corruption. With all of these negatives from this rapid growth, the people start to demand that political action and reform be taken. This is exactly what the progressive era is. Historians label this period from 1890, so the tail end of that second industrial revolution, until 1920. We call this the progressive era, where we are going to tackle the issues created by industrialization during the Gilded Age. That's what this entire unit is going to be about. But we have to start with where the roots of this movement really came from, and that comes from the agrarian movement. Looking at agriculture, this is going to be the first group of people that we see coming together to demand reform, demand government action. All right, let's take a peek. First, the farmer's dilemma. We are going to see that technological advances greatly increase the amount a farmer could harvest. That is great news. That means we are able to produce more and we're able to take care of it. But the downside of that is we are going to have a surplus, which means too many crops that could not be sold. We're producing more than what the people actually need. A tariff, which was passed by McKinley in 1890, is going to be one of the biggest the country has ever seen. Remember, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. What this tariff does, though, is have a negative effect on farmers because it will drive up the prices of equipment that farmers were purchasing. The conditions in the West are also going to add to these issues of the farmers. The conditions in the West being that there are blistering summers, cruel winters, insects that devastated crop yields, droughts that brought devastation to the West. So the farmers are going to start to see some downturn by growing too much of their crop, by being affected by the tariff, and then just facing difficult conditions because of Mother Nature. Now let's talk a little bit more about the high cost that we see for farmers. The more farmers produced, the more prices declined. We started to talk about supply and demand in the last unit, and it's coming back to us again. As you can see on the chart over there, we've got price on the left-hand side, we've got quantity measured along the bottom. And you can see as the supply of a good increases, the demand drops and the price drops. So when farmers were producing more of their product, the demand was decreasing because there's so much of it, people don't have to really think about wanting or needing it. They know it's always going to be there. And the price decreases as well because the farmers have to get rid of that product. They can't charge a high price for it. While prices are dropping on the goods, the cost of business is rising. The cost of machinery is going up. The cost of seed is always there. The cost of livestock, basic needs, that doesn't go away. And because of this, farmers are going to be spending more than they are earning, which puts them in a place of debt. In order to keep up with that debt, farmers are going to look for loans. Those loans are going to come from the banks. The way that they get those loans is by mortgaging or putting up their house and their land, and essentially they become tenant farmers, paying the banks back for that loan that they have taken. The farmers no longer owned that property, the bank does, in order to meet the needs and be able to survive the situation that they are put in. On top of all of these facts, it just keeps getting worse. Big business is going to start to hurt farmers as well. Farmers are going to blame the railroad monopolies who put their rates too high. Now, farmers rely heavily on the railroads to move their products. They need it. Somebody's got to move it from the west back to the east coast, okay? And the railroad monopoly had set their rate to move that product too high, and that's hurting the farmers who are already hurting. Also, the bank monopolies are going to come together to set high interest rates on the loans, which means if a farmer took out a $5,000 loan and they had to pay 10% interest on it, not only are they paying the $5,000 back, but they also have to pay 10% of that more. And the interest rates were crushing these farmers. On top of all of that, the leaders of the nation were no longer farmers like Jefferson, okay? They're coming from industrial states now, and these industrial leaders are going to forget the farmers and support industry. The farmers are going to harvest this feeling of they're the ones doing the honest work. They're producing goods that are necessary for everybody to live day to day. And the bankers and the businessmen are the ones who are getting rich. Because of all of these different pieces, the farmers are going to say we need to come together to force some reform, to get people to pay attention to the problems that we are going to and help us out. Which brings us to the Grange movement. Okay, the Grange movement is going to be organized by a guy named Oliver H. Kelly. He's going to be a Minnesota farmer, businessman, journalist, government clerk. He's got all of these different backgrounds that make him know what the farmers need, but he also knows how to compete against the businessmen, and he knows how to draw attention to what the farmers need as a journalist, and he knows the government side of it as a government clerk. So all of these pieces make him the perfect person to organize this movement. Now, the Grange movement had a couple of very simple goals. First, they want to provide an education on new farming techniques to the farmers who are out west. Because as we talked about at the end of the last unit, the West is a completely different beast than any of the land that we had known before. We need new farming techniques to be successful and to make sure that we don't absolutely destroy the land. Okay, so we want to first, with the Grange movement, provide education. The second thing the Grange movement wanted to do is get regulation of the railroads. Remember that railroad monopoly was setting rates that were too high for the farmers. We want regulation of that. And we want government regulation of the grain elevators, which were storage facilities that were used to store the wheat, the grain that was produced by these farmers out west. They were also setting high rates. They were also a big business monopoly that was hurting the farmers. So the Grange movement is going to call for the government to step in and regulate these two industries. This organization is going to build up some funds from the farmers that are involved, from the leaders that are involved, and they'll actually be able to solve the problem of the grain elevators by building their own. They say, you know what? We don't need that big business. If we pool our money, we can make our own grain elevators, and we can start challenging those monopolies. We don't even have to use your service. We'll use our own. We'll do it together. So they do get some success there. Also, on top of these successes, the Grange movement is going to push for some major achievements. First, they're going to get what's called the Granger laws passed. Remember, I say in U.S. history, we do not get creative when we name things. The Grange movement gets the Granger laws. These Granger laws are going to set a maximum rate that the railroad can charge. Remember, that was one of their big goals. They wanted the government to regulate the railroad rates, and they get it. What this also does is establish a state railroad commission, which would cover warehouses and grain elevators. So these commissions, these legislations would monitor the warehouses and grain elevators as well. So the Grangers could not only use the ones that they built, but they could also use other ones, and those rates would be regulated. So the Grangers are 100% getting what they set out to do. The Grangers also push for the federal government to create what's called the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC. The Interstate Commerce Commission is meant to oversee interstate transportation. This is transportation that goes from state to state to state. These are the railroads, okay? Transportation, that trade that they're doing. This commission, which is a group a group of Congress members that are going to keep a close eye on the railroads, their goal was to prevent any future monopolies in the railroad industry, to prevent the future farmers from getting their rates too high from the railroads, to prevent any abuse of the future farmers. So again, the Grangers getting what they need. Now, unfortunately, the end of this story isn't that great. The Grangers are going to decline in the late 1870s, but the farm protests are going to remain strong, and we'll see other groups come together like the Southern Farmers Alliance, who continue to fight for farmers' rights. But the purpose of looking at this Grange movement, at the terrible conditions that these farmers had to go through, is to show that when a group of people come together and demand reform, they can get it. And that's what the whole progressive era is about. A group of people coming together, demanding reform, and fixing the problems that were created by these monopolies during the Gilded Age. And I know I'm getting excited, but this is a huge unit that's going to help us look at the government in the way that it works today. All right, next time we come together, we're going to talk about populism and the Populist Party. Tonight, don't forget to do your homework, and I will see you next time.